He came to my door on a Tuesday evening with wide eyes and a shaking voice. I had not seen him in 4 months. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally run out of places to set it down. "I made a mistake," he said. "Please, give me another chance." I looked at him standing there. "Yo." The man who had sat across from me at my kitchen table 8 months ago and told me, with a calm that only belongs to someone who has already made their decision, that he did not have time for this relationship anymore. That he was finally going somewhere and needed to do it alone. I remembered watching him go. And I remembered what I had thought. He has no idea. He had no idea that the job he was so proud of, the opportunity he believed he had earned entirely on his own, existed because of me. Because of a conversation I had with my ex that Teo knew nothing about. I smiled at him quietly. "Come in," I said. I wanted to hear everything he had to say before I said anything back. That was how I had always done things. Gather the full picture first, then speak. "My name is Zola. I am 26 years old and I have always been the kind of person who thinks before acting. Not slow. Not indecisive. The kind of person who sees the full picture before moving. Who understands that patience is not the same as passivity." I had been with Teo for 14 months before he ended things. We met through mutual friends at a gathering that went longer than expected, the way good ones do. He was charming without effort. He asked good questions and remembered the answers, which is rarer than people think. He was 28, 3 years into a project management career that was not going as well as he had hoped. He had real skills and a real work ethic, but the right door had not opened yet. He talked about it sometimes with the specific frustration of a capable person watching opportunities arrive for everyone else first. I cared about his career because I cared about him. Simply true. My ex-boyfriend's name was Kwame. We had been apart for 2 years by the time Teo and I got together. We ended well. The kind of ending where friendship survives because respect does. What came next was never my plan. It happened because I am the kind of person who tries to help the people I love. I should have understood the risk of that earlier. Kwame worked in operations at a mid-size construction consultancy. He had been there 6 years and had built the kind of reputation where people asked for him specifically. His network was the kind you build by being genuinely useful over a long period of time. When Teo and I had been together about 5 months, he mentioned during dinner that he had applied for a project coordinator role at a firm he would not normally have been able to reach. A good firm. The kind that hired from existing networks rather than open applications. 3 weeks of silence. He was trying not to mention it, but I could see it sitting on him. I thought about it for a few days. Then I called Kwame. I did not ask him to hire Teo or risk his reputation. I mentioned that someone I was close to had applied to a firm in his sector, described Teo's background briefly, and asked whether Kwame knew anyone there who might be worth speaking to. Kwame made 2 calls. One of those calls reached a hiring manager who agreed to look at the application again. 3 weeks later, Teo got an interview. I never told Teo. Thought about it. But things moved quickly and the moment kept not being right. Then he got the offer and was so proud that telling him felt like it would take something from him. So I stayed quiet. That was my first mistake. Teo got the offer on a Thursday morning. He called from the car park outside his old office. His voice higher than I had ever heard it. A project coordinator role at Hartfield & Cole, one of the most respected names in his sector. 40% above what he had been earning. He was ecstatic, genuinely and completely, and I was happy for him. That was also simply true. Whatever existed in the background, his happiness in that moment was real and I shared it. We celebrated that evening. A restaurant we did not usually go to. He ordered champagne and made a small toast about hard work eventually paying off. About keeping going when it would have been easier to stop. I raised my glass and said I was proud of him. Meant it. Even knowing what I knew. The thing about Kwame's calls was that they had opened a door. Teo had still walked through it. He had interviewed well and earned the role once he was inside the room. I had not lied to myself about that. But the door existing at all was a different story. Mine and Kwame's, not Teyo's. I poured more champagne and let him talk about his plans. He had many plans. He always had many plans. I listened and watched him and thought that whatever happened next, I genuinely wanted this to be the beginning of something real for him. I still believe that was true. The 3 months after Teyo started the new job were the beginning of the end. He threw himself into the role with the energy of someone who feels, finally, that the world has recognized their value. Which I understood. But something shifted alongside the energy that I had not anticipated. He worked longer hours. Expected. But he came home differently. A new quality to how he talked about his days. Confidence with a slightly raised edge. Something mixed in that I did not immediately have a name for. He started canceling plans. Not dramatically. Gradually. Dinners with my friends became things he often had a reason to miss. Weekends away became harder to schedule. He said it was the learning curve. The proving himself period. I said I understood because I did understand those things in principle. But I noticed something I could not dismiss. He was always contactable during work hours. The inaccessibility was almost exclusively in evenings and weekends. The times when work was not the explanation. Filed that away. The way I filed most things that needed more information before I could understand them. I was still collecting. I did not yet know what I was collecting toward, but the habit of noticing and holding information carefully was too deep in me to stop. It was simply how I moved through the world. And it would eventually matter enormously. He ended things on a Sunday afternoon in the 4th month. We were at my flat. He had been quiet all weekend in the way that tells you a conversation is coming before it arrives. I decided not to prompt it. If he needed to say something, he would say it. He sat down and said he had been thinking for a while and did not think this was working anymore. I asked what he meant. He said he was in a new chapter of his life. That the job had changed his perspective. That he needed space to focus on building the career he had always wanted without the weight of a relationship pulling in another direction. He said it with the calm of someone who had rehearsed it. I just need to do this next part alone, he said. I think we both know this hasn't been right for a while. I did not argue. I looked at him sitting on my sofa talking about his new chapter, and I thought about Kwame's 2 phone calls and about the champagne and his toast about hard work. Okay, I said. He seemed surprised it was that clean. I walked him to the door. He hugged me briefly and left. I stood in my hallway alone. The irony of everything was precise and specific and sat in my chest like something with a temperature. He was walking away feeling independent and self-made. And I was the only one who knew the full story. Cried that night. I want to be honest about that. Not from surprise. I had felt things moving toward this end for weeks. But knowing something is coming and having it arrive are 2 different experiences. And the arrival hit harder than the knowing had. I had genuinely loved Teyo. Not in the overwhelming way of stories, but in the real, daily, quiet way that involves choosing someone repeatedly and building something alongside them. That had been real. And it was over. I also sat with something else that night. A feeling I did not have a clean name for. Not exactly anger. More like the discomfort of holding information the other person does not have, and understanding for the first time the full weight of that imbalance. He had left me feeling like he was finally standing on his own feet. Independent, successful, no longer needing what our relationship had offered. The irony was precise. He was standing on ground I had helped make. He just did not know it. I thought about telling him that night. Picking up my phone and sending the full story. I did not do it. Not because I was planning something. 'Cause it did not feel like the right thing. The right moment was not available yet. And I had always, without exception, through every difficult thing I had faced, waited for the right thing. The right moment would come. It always did. I called Kwame 2 days after Teyo left. Not to tell him what to do. Partly because I needed to speak to someone who knew the full picture. Partly because Kwame and I maintained the kind of friendship where checking in was normal. He picked up and asked how I was. I told him Teyo and I had ended things. He was quiet. Then he asked if I was all right. I said I was getting there. He said he was sorry, the way Kwame said things, as if he meant it. Then he asked carefully whether Tayo had ever mentioned how he heard about the Hartfield opportunity. Said no. That Tayo believed he had found it through his own application and been selected through the standard process. He doesn't know, Kwame said. No, I said. A silence that felt longer than it was. That's going to matter at some point, he said. I told him I thought so too. That I did not know when or how, but that the truth had a way of finding its moment. He said he trusted my judgment on that. We talked about other things and then I hung up and made tea and sat with the window open and let the evening come in. Something was still unfinished. I could feel it. I had no idea yet how much more had to happen before it would be finished. I put myself back together in the ordinary way that requires. I went to work, exercised, called friends. I did not allow myself to spend evenings checking his social media. I was fine, genuinely functional and moving forward, if not yet fully healed. Then about 6 weeks after the breakup, my friend Nadia texted. We had been close since university. She had met Tayo twice and had not particularly warmed to him. I had noticed at the time but had not pressed her. Now she was pressing me. She asked if I had a minute to talk. Said yes. She told me something she had been sitting on since the breakup. She had a friend whose social circle overlapped with people at Hartfield. Someone in that circle had mentioned Tayo being seen out with a woman multiple times in the months before the breakup. Not a colleague. Not a family friend. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. How long? Asked. I think it started around month 2 of the new job, she said. Month 2. Which meant while he was still with me. While I was still celebrating his success. While he was giving me the speech about needing space and his new chapter. I breathed very slowly. Thank you for telling me, I said. I hung up and sat in the particular stillness of someone whose suspicion has just been confirmed completely. I did not act immediately. I sat with what Nadia had told me for a full week. Gave it space. I thought about whether I trusted the information, which I did. Nadia was not someone who passed on rumors lightly. I thought about what it meant in the context of everything I already knew. It meant that when Tayo delivered his clean speech about space and independence and new chapters, there had already been someone else. The speech had been performed on top of a different truth. The relationship had not simply wound down from its own weight. It had been ended deliberately while something else was already running. That distinction mattered to me. Not because it changed what I had lost, but because it changed what I understood about who had taken it. I called Kwame on a Thursday evening and told him what I had learned. He was quiet for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful and deliberate. I put my name behind him, he said. Twice. I know, I said. I need to think about this, he said. I know that too, I said. I'll call you, he said. I trusted Kwame's judgment completely. Whatever he decided to do next would be the right thing. Not because I needed revenge. Because a person who opens a door for someone deserves to know exactly who walked through it. Kwame called back 2 days later. He had done what he always did. Gathered information, spoken to the right people, formed a clear picture before saying anything. He told me he had spoken to Ben, a senior operations director at Hartfield, the man Kwame had originally contacted on Tayo's behalf. Their professional relationship was built on years of mutual trust and genuine respect. Kwame had told Ben the full story. About the recommendation made on behalf of a relationship that had turned out to involve sustained dishonesty. About the cheating. About the way Tayo had carried himself as someone building a life with integrity while doing the opposite. Ben had listened carefully. He asked questions. He said he would look into it. He won't dismiss him just for a breakup, Kwame told me. But he will watch. And there are things about how Tayo has been conducting himself at work that Ben has had questions about already. What kind of things? Asked. The way he presents himself. His background. The impression he creates. He has been less than honest in some internal conversations. Small things. But patterns. I absorbed that. What happens now? Asked. We wait, Kwame said. And we see what Teo does next. I was very good at waiting. I always had been. And the waiting this time would not be long. Teo called me for the first time 6 weeks after the breakup. I did not pick up. He left a voicemail saying he had been thinking about things and wanted to talk. His voice had a different quality from the sofa conversation. Something slightly less certain. I listened twice. I did not return the call. He texted 3 days later. Short message. He missed talking to me and wanted to meet up as friends. Friends. The phrasing of someone recalibrating their approach. I texted back that I was busy for the next few weeks but hoped he was well. He left it at that. For a while. Nadia updated me around this time. The woman he had been seeing during our relationship had ended things with him shortly after his breakup with me. Nadia did not know why. But the thing he had been building while ending us had not resulted in what he intended. I thought about that for a while. He had left a relationship while already holding what he believed was a better option. And the better option had not held. He was now alone. And the job he believed was his foundation was, I was beginning to understand, on shakier ground than he knew. The picture was becoming very clear. The pieces were almost all in place. I was simply waiting for the last one to arrive. Things at Hartfield shifted in the 3rd month after the breakup. I heard this from Kwame, who heard it from Ben. What Ben observed confirmed the pattern he had already sensed. Teo had been misrepresenting his experience in internal conversations. Not dramatically. In the way people misrepresent things when their ego has grown faster than their actual record. Inflating his role in decisions, taking credit for team outcomes, overstating his previous experience to new colleagues. In a company where reputation was built on honesty about what you knew and had done, these were not small things. Ben had also formed a clearer picture of the recommendation. Kwame had been explicit. His endorsement had been made in good faith based on a representation of Teo's character that had turned out to be incomplete. The person he had vouched for had been engaged in deception during the very period when Kwame's trust was being used to open doors. Ben took that seriously. Kwame's name carried weight at Hartfield. The idea that it had been used to benefit someone whose conduct did not warrant it was not something he would let settle quietly. He initiated a formal employment review. I did not know about this yet when Teo came to my door with shaking hands and wide eyes. But I knew enough. Enough to smile quietly when he asked to come in. He came to my door on a Tuesday evening. 4 months after the sofa conversation. I looked at him and thought about everything that had passed between that evening and this one. The voicemail. The information from Nadia. The conversations with Kwame. The full picture I had been building piece by piece. I made a mistake, he said. Please. Give me another chance. I let him in and we sat in my living room. He was not the man who had given the clean speech about new chapters. The edges of that version had been worn down by something. The particular quality of someone who has lost the certainty that everything is going their way was visible in how he held himself. He talked for a long time. About missing me. About making a mistake in how he had handled the breakup. About the months apart making him understand what he had given up. He did not mention the woman. He did not mention anything that was not about his own feelings. I listened to all of it. Quietly and without interruption. When he finished I said, Teo, I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer. He said of course. How do you think you got the job at Hartfield? He looked at me. Something flickered across his face for just a moment. Hard work, he said. And my application. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I began. You applied cold, I said. To a company that does not typically hire from open applications. You had 3 weeks of silence and then suddenly got an interview. You never questioned how that happened. He was very still. My application was strong, he said. Your application was good. But it needed to reach the right person. Applications at Hartfield are reviewed by a team and filed. Yours was pulled back out and reconsidered. Do you know why? He did not answer. I told him about the phone call. About Kwame. About the 2 calls that had reached Ben. About the door that had existed because I had asked someone I trusted to make a quiet introduction on behalf of someone I loved. I said it without anger, clearly and in sequence. He sat very still for a long moment. "You never told me," he said. "No," I said. "Why?" "Because I thought it would take something from you. The moment kept not being right. Then you got the offer and you were so proud that telling you felt cruel." He looked at his hands. "And Kwame knows about..." He stopped. "Yes," I said. "Kwame knows everything. About the recommendation. About what happened during the relationship. About the other woman." The color in his face changed. Not dramatically. The expression of a person running calculations quickly and not liking any of the results. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means that the person who opened the door for you is aware of how you conducted yourself while that door was open," I said. "And that the employment review that has been initiated at Hartfield did not come from nowhere." He stood up. "There's a review. There has been for about 2 weeks." He walked to the window and stood with his back to me. I could see his shoulders and the tension in them of someone who has just understood the shape of the situation they are in. "You did this," he said. His voice had an edge. "No," I said. "You did this. I simply did not protect you from it." He turned. "You could have warned me." "I could have," I said. "The way you could have been honest with me about what was happening while we were still in this relationship." The silence after that had a different quality from the ones before it. A specific moment landing in a specific place. "You know about that too," he said. "Yes," I said. He sat back down. The edge left his voice and something much less certain replaced it. The confidence he had walked in with had been built on sand, and he was only now standing on the sand instead of above it. We were finally in the same room with the same information. It had taken 8 months to get here. We talked for a long time after that. Not the way he had planned to talk. The way two people talk when pretense has been removed and what remains is just the truth. He told me about the other woman. Her name was Tamara. Started 3 months into the new job. He said he had told himself it was not serious. That it was separate from us. I listened without interrupting. He said she had ended things about 6 weeks after he ended things with me. That she had been seeing someone else simultaneously and had not considered Tayo a serious situation. The specific irony of that I kept to myself. He had been building something on the side while dismantling us. And the side thing had itself been a side thing. He had been someone's Tayo without knowing it. He asked what was going to happen with the Hartfield review. I told him honestly that I did not know. That it was between him and the company and that Kwame would not interfere in either direction. That the review was based on his actual conduct at work. "Can you speak to Kwame?" he asked. "No," I said. "I am not going to intervene in a professional process on behalf of someone who was not honest with me." He looked at the floor. "I deserved that," he said. "Yes," I said. "You did." We sat in that honesty for a while. He stayed for another hour. Not because I wanted him to. Because he seemed to need the time to understand that there was nothing here for him to recover. The version of events where he arrived desperate and left with what he came for was not available. He talked about regret. He said he had made decisions when everything was going well that he would not have made if he had been thinking clearly. That the job had changed him in ways he had not noticed until he lost things that did not come with a job. At one point he said, "I thought I was finally doing it on my own." That felt important. I needed to believe I had done something by myself. I looked at him. "You did do something by yourself," I said. "You interviewed well. You performed in the role. Nobody did those things for you. But the door, you did not open that door. And because you did not know it existed, you carried the success like you had earned it entirely alone." Which was never quite true. He was quiet. "The story you told yourself about succeeding was incomplete," I said. "That's the hardest part. Not that you failed somewhere. That the version of success you were so proud of had a part you didn't know about." He nodded slowly. He looked very tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has held a version of themselves together through effort for a long time. The effort had finally run out. He left around 10 o'clock. He hugged me at the door the way people hug when they know they are not coming back. Let him. Then I closed the door and stood in my hallway. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. Felt completion. The feeling of a thing having been fully seen and fully said, and now, for the first time, fully known by everyone involved. Teo now knew about Kwame's calls. He knew that I had known through the champagne dinner and the clean speech and the 4 months of silence and independence. He knew that I had not told him immediately and would probably spend time working out what that meant about what I had wanted for him versus what I had wanted for myself. I had thought about that question honestly. I believed that in the beginning, what I had wanted was genuinely for him. The choice not to tell him had been about protecting something I thought mattered to him. What came after? Not intervening when the information landed in Kwame's hands, letting things unfold without stepping in. That required its own honest name. Gave it one. The specific permission of letting a person face what they had actually built. Not malice. Not revenge. Just the quiet refusal to stand between someone and the consequences of their own choices. I had been that person before. I would not be it again. Kwame called the following morning. He had texted the night before to ask if I was all right. I had replied that I was. He called to hear the full version. I told him everything that had been said. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked how I felt. I told him honestly. Clear. Like a thing that had been in motion for a long time had finally found the place it needed to stop. He said he understood that. He told me about the Hartfield review outcome. Ben had concluded it. Teo was not being terminated. The misrepresentations had not risen to that level. But he had been formally cautioned and placed under closer supervision. His probationary extension confirmed. The trajectory he had been building, the fast reputation of someone untouchable and entirely self-made, was now significantly adjusted. The door Kwame had opened had not been closed. But the room on the other side had become considerably smaller. Do you feel guilty about any of it? Kwame asked. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I didn't manufacture anything. I let things be what they were. That's a clear place to stand, he said. Yes, I said. It is. We talked about other things for a while and then he had a meeting. We said goodbye. I sat with my coffee and the morning light and felt, for the first time in months, completely at rest. Nadia came over for dinner 2 weeks after Teo's visit. She brought wine and asked for the full story, and I gave it to her the way I gave things to people I trusted, completely and in order. She listened with the attention she brought to things that mattered. She asked the right questions. When I finished, she topped up my glass and said, "You handled that with more grace than I would have." I asked what she would have done. She laughed. Told him at the champagne dinner. While he was making his little toast. Smiled. I thought about it. Why didn't you? I had thought about this enough to have a real answer. Because telling him then would have been about me, I said. About making sure he knew what I knew. It would have felt satisfying in the moment, and then I would have had to live with having done it for that reason. And the way you did it was about him understanding the full picture. When there was nothing left for him to hide behind. Nadia was quiet for a moment. You know what I think the worst part is for him, she said. What? That you were always on his side. Right up until the moment he gave you reason not to be. Picked up my glass. I thought that was exactly right. Some people do not understand what they have until the person holding it simply stops. I thought about Teo in the weeks after. Not obsessively. Not with the weight of someone who has not found peace with something. In the reflective way that follows a long chapter closing. I thought about who he had been when we met. Frustrated but trying. Capable but stuck. There had been something genuinely worth rooting for in him at the beginning. I had rooted for it without reservation. That had been real and I did not need to revise it. I thought about what the job had done. Not the job itself. The story he had built around it. The way he had needed it to be something he had earned alone because the alternative, that help had played a part, was something his ego could not accommodate. There is a specific vulnerability in people who need to believe they are entirely self-made. Makes them brittle. Because when you cannot admit you received help, you cannot be grateful for it. And when you cannot be grateful, you cannot protect what you have. You hold everything like it is yours by right rather than by fortune and effort combined. Tayo had not been a bad person. He had been a person with a specific blind spot who had made choices that the blind spot made possible. I had had a choice about whether to fill in that blind spot for him. I had made my choice. I stood by it. I ran into Tayo once more, about 2 months after his visit. Not planned. A coffee shop near where we had both lived. I was at a corner table with a book, and he walked in and saw me before I saw him. He came over and asked if he could sit for a moment. Said yes. He looked better than he had at my door. Not the polished certainty of the champagne version, but something more grounded. The look of someone who has had a difficult few months and has started to come through the other side. He said he had been thinking about what I told him. About the story he had carried. He had spoken to his manager and been more honest about his background. The review had been uncomfortable but useful. He asked if I was doing well. I told him I was. Genuinely. He said he was sorry. For the cheating, for the way he had left, for carrying a false story without examining it. I said I accepted the apology. Meant it. Not as a restoration of anything. As a true statement. He finished his coffee and stood up. He said he hoped things went well for me. I said the same. He left. I went back to my book. It was the right ending for that version of things. Quiet, honest, no loose edges remaining. I turned the page and read 2 more chapters before the afternoon light shifted. I want to say something about what I learned from all of this. Not a moral exactly. More like things that became clear and that I carry differently now. The first is about help. Help given genuinely and without condition is still help. But help that is never acknowledged cannot be built on properly. It becomes invisible and the person who received it misattributes what they have. I should have found a way to tell Tayo earlier, before the story he was telling himself became too fixed to correct easily. The silence that felt protective turned out to be one of the things that made everything harder. The second is about patience. Holding information is not the same as weaponizing it. There were times I held what I knew because the moment was not right. That was judgment, not cruelty. But judgment has to be honest about its own motivations. Mine held up when I examined them. Not everyone's will. The third is about what people reveal when things are going well. Tayo had been worth caring about when he needed support. The person he revealed when he stopped needing it was different. That difference is not unusual. But it is information. And information, when it arrives honestly, should be believed. I believed it. Quietly and completely. Then I let it do what true information always does when given enough time. Found its level. It has been 8 months since Tayo stood at my door with shaking hands. Am well. That is the short version and also the accurate one. Same flat. Same work. Same people. Nadia and I have dinner regularly. Kwame and I check in. My life has the texture of something genuinely mine. Not built to impress anyone or prove anything, simply built around what I actually value. I think about the full arc of it sometimes. The dinner with the champagne glass I raised and meant. The Sunday sofa and the clean speech. The voicemail. Call to Nadia. Tuesday door. I think about the version of me who sat with all of that information across all of those months and chose, each time, not to act from anger or ego or the need to be seen to win. I am glad she made those choices. Not because they led somewhere satisfying, though I think they did. But because they were the choices she could live with. That is the only standard that has ever made sense to me. I do not know what Tayo's life looks like now. I genuinely wish him well. I hope he is building something that does not require a false story to hold it up. False stories are exhausting to maintain. The true ones hold their own weight. And the weight in the end is what matters. Everything else is just timing.